The Seven Beggars, sipurei masios, the 13th story. I will tell you how people once rejoiced. There was once a king who had an only son. The king wanted to give over his kingdom to his son during his lifetime. On the day of his son's coronation, the king made a great ball. Whenever the king makes a ball, there is great rejoicing. But now, when the king was giving over the kingdom to his son during his lifetime, the rejoicing was immense. All the royal ministers, dukes, and officials were there, and they rejoiced greatly at the feast. Everyone in the land was also pleased by this. It was a great historic event, literally honor, that the king was giving the kingdom over to his son during his lifetime, and there was great rejoicing. There were all sorts of entertainment at the ball, such as bands, capellish, comedians, and the like. Everything to make people rejoice. When the rejoicing reached its peak, the king stood up and said to his son, I am an expert in astrology, and I see that you are destined to lose your kingdom. When you lose power, be careful not to become depressed. You must remain joyful. If you are happy, then I will also be happy. But if you become sad, then I will still be happy, because you are no longer king. If you are not able to remain happy when you lose your royal power, then you are not fit to be a king. But if you remain happy, then I will be extremely happy. The king's son took over the kingdom with a firm hand, Yad Rama in Hebrew. He appointed his own ministers, dukes, and officials, and set up his own army. The king's son was very wise, and he loved wisdom very much. He surrounded himself with great sages. Whenever anyone presented him with a wise thought, he cherished it. And gave the person whatever he wanted, whether honor or wealth. If the person wanted wealth, he would be given wealth. If he wanted honor, he would be given honor. The king's son valued wisdom so much, he would give anything for it. All the people, therefore, became involved in academic studies. Soon the entire land was involved with wise thoughts. Those who desired wealth did so to receive wealth from the king's son, while others did it to gain importance and honor. Since everyone was immersed in theoretical studies, the land forgot the art of war. The people became so totally involved in mental gymnastics that they all became very intelligent, even the least of them. The people developed such high intelligence that the least of them would be the most intelligent people in other lands. The wise men of that land were therefore extremely intelligent. As a result of their secular studies, the wise men of that land became atheists, nispaker. They convinced the king's son of their ideas, and he also became an atheist. The common people, however, did not become atheists. The arguments of the wise men were so deep and subtle, dakus, that the common people could not grasp them, and therefore they were not harmed by these ideas. But the king's son and the wise men all became atheists. Nevertheless, the king's son had a spark of good in him. He had been born with good, and he had a good nature. Whenever he contemplated his situation and realized what he was doing, he would moan and sigh, because he had fallen into such confused beliefs. Realizing that he had fallen into error, he would moan and sigh very much. But then he would try to think logically, and he would once again become immersed in his atheistic ideas. This happened many times. When he contemplated, he would moan and sigh. But as soon as he began to think logically, his atheistic ideas would overwhelm him. One day, there was a mass flight from a certain country. بع'ha in Hebrew. All the people fled, and in the course of their flight they passed through a forest. There, a boy and girl, Zachar and Nekeva, were lost. One person lost a little boy, and another lost a little girl. They were both small children, around 4 or 5 years old. The children did not have any food. They began to scream and weep because they did not have anything to eat. Suddenly a beggar appeared. He had a sack, tarbus, in which he was carrying bread. The children approached him and began to follow him. He gave them some bread and they ate. "How did you come to be here?" he asked them. "We don't know," they replied. They were only little children. When he began to leave, they asked him to take them along. "I do not want you to go with me," he replied. Meanwhile, they got a better look at him, and they realized that he was blind. They found this very surprising. If he was blind, how did he find his way? Actually, it might seem strange that they were surprised at this, since they were still little children. But they were very intelligent children, and therefore found this surprising. The blind beggar blessed them, that they should be like him, saying that they should be old like him. He left them some bread to eat, and he went on his way. The children realized that God was watching over them and had brought them this blind beggar to give them food. When the bread was used up, they began to cry for food again. Night fell and they slept. In the morning, they did not have anything to eat, and they cried out and wept. Meanwhile, another beggar came. They realized that he was deaf. As soon as they began to speak to him, he made gestures with his hands indicating that he did not hear. He also gave them some bread. When he was about to leave, they asked him to take them along, but he refused. He also blessed them that they should be like him. With that, he left them some bread and went on his way. When the bread was used up, they cried out again. Another beggar appeared, and he had a speech defect. Kvad peh. When they began to speak to him, he stammered, megamgen, gestumpert, so badly that they could not understand what he was saying. He could understand them, but because of his stammering, they could not make out what he was saying. He also gave them bread, and before he left, blessed them that they should be like him. He then went on his way, just as the previous ones had. Later, another beggar came. He had a crooked neck. The same thing happened as before. Then another beggar came, and he was a hunchback, hoiker. Later, a beggar without hands came. Finally, they encountered a beggar without feet. Each one of these beggars gave them bread and blessed them that they should be like him. Each one behaved in the same manner. When all their bread was used up, they began to walk, hoping to come to an inhabited area. They came to a path and followed it until they came to a small town. The children came to a house, and the people had pity on them and gave them some bread. They went to another house, and the people also gave them food. They thus began to go from door to door. The children realized that things were going well for them, and that people were giving them bread. The children promised each other that they would always remain together. They made themselves large beggars' sacks, tarbus, and continued going from door to door. They also attended all celebrations, such as circumcision ceremonies and weddings. They then decided to move on, and they went to the larger cities, where they also begged from door to door. They went to the fairs, where they sat together with the other beggars by the fences, prisbis, holding their alms plate. Eventually, these children became well known to all the beggars. They all knew them and were aware that they were the children who had been lost in the forest. Once there was a huge fair in one of the large cities. All the beggars went there, and these children were also there. Suddenly the beggars got the idea that these two children would be a perfect match for one another, and that they should be married. As soon as a few of the beggars began to discuss it, they all agreed that it was an excellent idea, and the match was made. The only problem was how to make a wedding. When they discussed the problem, they realized that soon it would be the king's birthday, and that he was making a public feast. Meninas. And the beggars decided to go there, and any meat and bread that they could beg would be used to make the wedding. The beggars carried out their plan and went to the public feast. All the beggars went to the feast, and they begged meat and bread. They also gathered the meat and fine white bread, kolich, that was left over from the feast. They then went and dug a huge pit, large enough to hold 100 men. They covered it with reeds, earth, and dung. All of them then entered the pit, and they made a wedding for the children. The beggars brought them under the marriage canopy, the chuppah, and were very, very joyous. The bridegroom and bride were also extremely joyous. They began to remember the kindness that God had shown them when they were in the forest. They wept and yearned very much, saying, if only the first beggar, the blind one, who had brought us bread in the forest, could be here the first day. Suddenly, while they were yearning very greatly for the blind beggar, he spoke up and said, here I am. I've come to be at your wedding. I am giving you a wedding present. Matuna le drusha geschenk. That you should be old like me. I originally gave you this as a blessing, but now I am giving this as a full gift for your wedding present. That you should have a long life like me. That you should have a long life like mine. You think that I am blind? Actually, I am not blind at all. But the entire duration of the world's existence is not considered by me to be even like the blink of an eye. It was for this reason that he appeared to be blind. He did not look at the world at all. Since the entire duration of the world's existence was not considered by him to be even like the blink of an eye, the entire concept of looking at anything in the world or seeing it did not apply to him at all. I am extremely old, but I am completely young. I have not yet begun to live, but nevertheless, I am very old. This is not merely my own opinion. I also have the word haskama, agreement or approbation of the great eagle. Let me tell you the story. Once upon a time, people took to the sea in many ships. A great storm came and shattered the ships. The people, however, survived, and they came to a tower. They went up into the tower, and there they found food, drink, clothing, and everything else that they needed. All good things and every pleasure in the world was there. The people began to converse, and they decided that each one should tell an ancient story involving his earliest memory. Each one would tell what he remembered from the time that his memory began. There were old and young people present. They honored the oldest man among them to tell his story first. What shall I tell you? He said. I can even remember when they cut the apple from the branch. No one understood what he meant. However, there were wise men there, and they said, this is obviously a very ancient story. They then honored the second one to tell his story. The second one, who was not as old as the first, said, is that then an old story? That story I also remember, but I can also remember when the lamp was lit. This story is even older than the first, said the wise men. But they were quite surprised, since the second one was not quite as old as the first, but still, he could remember an older event. They then honored the third one to tell his story. The third one, who was younger than the first two, said, I remember when the fruit began to have a structure. That is, when the fruit began to be put together. Rakam, knit or embroidered. That story is even older, they responded. The fourth one, who was still younger, spoke up, I also remember when the seed was brought to plant the fruit. The fifth one, who was younger yet, said, I also remember when the wise men invented the seed. Invented, mamtzi, ausgetracht, thought up. The sixth one, who was younger still, said, I remember the taste of the fruit before it entered the fruit. The seventh one spoke up, I remember the fragrance of the fruit before it entered the fruit. The eighth one said, I remember the appearance of the fruit before it was drawn onto the fruit. In Yiddish it is, I remember the appearance of the fruit before the appearance was on the fruit. I was also there at the time, and I was still an infant. I spoke up and said to them, I remember all these events, and I remember absolutely nothing. And ich gedenk gar nicht. This is a very ancient story, said the wise men, more so than all the others. They were very surprised that a child remembered more than any of them. In the midst of this, the great eagle came and knocked on the tower. Stop being poor. Return to your treasures. Make use of your treasures. He then told them to leave the tower in order of their age, with the oldest going out first. As he brought them out of the tower, he brought me, the infant, out first. Since I, the text uses the third person since he, was actually older than all the rest, and he was bringing us out in order of age. Actually, the youngest was the oldest, and the oldest of them was the youngest. The great eagle then said, I will explain the stories that each one told. The first one said that he remembered when they cut the apple from the branch. He was saying that he remembered when they cut his umbilical cord. He was saying that he remembered when he was born, and they cut his navel cord. The second one said that he remembered when the lamp was burning. He could also remember when he was in his mother's womb, with a lamp burning over his head. The third one said that he remembered when the fruit began to form. He could remember when his body began to knit together as the fetus took its form. The fourth one said that he remembered when the seed was brought to be planted. He remembered how the drop was emitted at the time of conception. The fifth one remembered the wise men who discovered the seed. He remembered when the seed was still in the brain. The brain's mental power gives rise to the drop. The sixth one remembered the taste. This is the nefesh, soul. The seventh one remembered the fragrance. This is the ruach, spirit. The eighth one remembered the appearance. This is the neshama, essence. Finally, there was the child who said that he remembered absolutely nothing. He is higher than all the rest, since he remembered even what was before the nefesh, soul, the ruach, spirit, and the neshama, essence. This is the concept of nothingness. Mamon. He then said to them, return to your ships, which are your bodies. They were shattered, but they will be rebuilt. Now go back to them. With that he blessed them. The great eagle then said to me, you come with me, since you are just like me. You are very old, and at the same time very young. You have not yet begun to live, but you are extremely old. I am the same, since I am old, and at the same time I am young. Therefore I have the word of the great eagle that I have lived a very long life. Now, I am giving you my long life as a wedding present. Drosha Geshank. When the beggar said this, there was tremendous joy and rejoicing there. Mamon. The second day. On the second of the 7 days of celebration, the couple began to remember the second beggar, the deaf one, who had sustained them and given them bread. They wept and yearned. How can we bring here the deaf beggar who sustained us? While they were yearning for him, he suddenly appeared and said, here I am. He fell on them and kissed them. He then said to them, "Now I will give you a gift that you should be like me. You should live a good life like mine. I originally gave you this as a blessing, but now, as your wedding present, I am giving you this as an unrestricted gift. You think that I am deaf? I am not deaf at all, but the whole world does not amount to anything to me that I should listen to its shortcomings. All sounds come from deficiencies, chasroinus, since everyone cries out because of what he is lacking. Even all the joys of the world are the result of lacks, since it is only because one has a lack that one rejoices when the lack is filled. But the entire world does not amount to anything from me that I should allow its deficiencies to enter my ears. I have a good life where nothing is lacking. I have the word haskama of the land of wealth, that I lived the good life. His good life was that he had bread to eat and water to drink." He then told them the story. There was a land that had lots of wealth and great treasures. Once the people got together and each one began to boast about how he lived the good life. Each one related exactly what kind of good life he had. I spoke up and said, "I am living a good life that is better than your good life. If you want proof, let me tell you about a certain land. If you are truly living a good life, let's see if you can save this land." This land had a garden. This garden had fruit which had every taste in the world. It also had every fragrance in the world. It also had every sight in the world. It also had every sight in the world, every color and every kind of flower, kviatin. Everything was in the garden. There was a gardener, a grudnik, in charge of this garden. Because of that garden, the people of that land lived a good life. The gardener then vanished. With no one tending to the garden, everything in the garden naturally withered and died. Nevertheless, the people were still able to live from the wild plants that grew in the garden. A cruel king then attacked the land. But he was not able to do anything to the people. He therefore decided to ruin the good life that the land had from the garden. However, he did not ruin the garden itself. Instead, he left 3 groups of servants. He ordered them to follow his instructions and thus ruin the people's sense of taste. As a result of what they did, whenever anyone tasted anything, it had the taste of a rotten carcass, nevela. They also ruined the sense of smell. Every fragrance that the people smelled had the stench of galbanum, chelbanum. They also destroyed the sense of sight. They dimmed the people's eyes as if they were covered with clouds and mists. All this was done at the cruel king's command. Now, if you are truly living the good life, let's see if you can save them. I am telling you this because if you do not save them, then the damage that is stricken this land can also harm you. The wealthy people set off toward that land, and I also went with them. While traveling, each of them lived the good life in his way, since each one had taken along his treasures. However, as soon as they came near that land, their sense of taste began to go bad. They also began to feel that other things were also being spoiled for them. I said to them, "You have not even entered the land yet, and your sense of taste, etc. is ruined. What will happen once you actually get there? How will you be able to save them?" I then took my bread and water and gave some of them. As soon as they tasted my bread and water, their sense of taste was remedied. The same was true of their sense of smell and the like. Meanwhile, the people of the land that had the garden began to look for ways to remedy their senses that had been ruined. Their conclusion involved the land of wealth, from which I was now coming. It seemed that their lost gardener, who had provided them with the good life, had the same roots as the people of the land of wealth, who also had a good life. Therefore, their plan was to send a delegation to the land of wealth, who would certainly be able to help them. They sent messengers to the land of wealth. Along the way, the messengers met the people from the land of wealth with whom they had gone. with whom I had gone. Where are you going? They asked the messengers. We are going to the land of wealth, they replied. We want them to help us. We ourselves are from the land of wealth, said the others. We are on our way to you. I said to the others, actually, you need me. You cannot go there yourselves. You cannot go there yourselves, as you have already seen. You stay here. I will go with the messengers and help the land. I went with them, and we came to a city in the land. When I arrived, I saw a few people come and began to tell jokes. Halatzos, vatlu. Then other people gathered around, and they told jokes, giggling and laughing. When I listened more carefully, literally inclined my ear, I realized that they were telling obscene jokes, nivul peh. One made an obscene remark, and another would repeat it in a more subtle fashion. Some would laugh, another would enjoy it. I then went to another city and saw two people arguing about a business deal. They went to court to settle the affair, and the court ruled that one was liable and the other innocent. However, as soon as they left the court, they once again began to argue. They said that they did not like the decision of this court and wanted another court. Since both of them wanted to try the case in another court, they chose another one. But after the case was tried, one of the people began arguing with someone else, and these two chose another court. The place was thus full of strife and argument. The people needed so many courts that the entire city was full of courts. I observed all this and realized that there was no truth there. Today a judge might decide in one person's favor and show him special consideration, and tomorrow the other would return the favor. Everything was based on bribery with no sense of the truth. I also noticed that the people were totally immoral sexually. Sexual immorality was so prevalent that everything seemed permissible to them. Literally became like permissible. I said to them, this is the reason that the taste, the fragrance, and the appearance have been spoiled for you. This cruel king left with you 3 groups of his servants, and they ruined the land. These servants began by speaking in a profane manner among themselves, and this brought profanity to the land. As a result of the profanity, the sense of taste became ruined, and everything tastes like a rotten carcass. They also brought bribery into the land. As a result, the eyes were dimmed, and the sense of sight was ruined, since bribery blinds the eyes of the wise. Also, they brought sexual immorality into the land. This caused the sense of smell to be ruined. Therefore, you must correct these 3 wrongs in your land, find out who the king's servants are, and drive them away. When you correct these 3 wrongs, then not only will you restore the taste, fragrance, and appearance, but the missing gardener will also be able to be found. The people did this and began to rid the land of these 3 wrongs. They investigated the king's agents, and when they captured them, they asked, "Where do you come from?" When they determined that they were the cruel king's agents, they banished them. The land was thus rectified of the 3 wrongs. While this was going on, there was sudden excitement. People began to say, "There is a crazy man who is going around saying that he is the gardener." Everyone thought that he was crazy, so they threw stones at him and drove him away. But somehow, it is possible that he is the one. Maybe he is actually the gardener. The men who were trying to remedy the land went and brought him before them. I said, "Certainly this is really the gardener. Therefore I have the word of the land of wealth that I lived the good life, since I was able to rectify this land. Now my gift to you is my good life." When he finished speaking, there was great joy and tremendous rejoicing. Similarly, all the beggars were to return and come to the wedding, giving the couple wedding presents that they should be like them. What they had originally given as a blessing, they gave as a wedding present. The first one thus gave them a gift of long life, while the second one gave them a gift of a good life. the third day. On the third day, the couple once again began to reminisce, and they wept and yearned. How can we bring the third beggar who had a speech defect? All of a sudden he appeared and said, "Here I am." He fell on them and kissed them. He then said, "At first, I blessed you that you should be like me. Now I am giving you as a wedding present that you should be like me. You think that I have a speech defect? I do not have a speech defect at all. Rather, all the words in the world which do not praise God do not have any perfection in them. I therefore seem to have a speech defect, since I cannot speak words which lack perfection. But actually, I do not have a speech defect at all. Quite the contrary. I am a wonderful orator and speaker. I can speak in parables, chidos, and lyric, shirim, lieder, that are so wonderful that there is no created thing in the world that does not want to hear me. The parables and lyrics that I know contain all wisdom. Regarding this, I have the word haskama of a great man who is called the true man of kindness, der große Mann, der emeser ish chesed. This is the exact wording of our Rebbe of blessed memory. Der große Mann, der emeser ish chesed, the true man of kindness, of a great man who is called the true man of kindness. There is an entire story about this. Once all the wise men were sitting together, and each one boasted of his wisdom. One boasted that with his wisdom he had discovered how to make iron. One boasted that he had discovered another type of metal. One boasted that with his wisdom he had discovered how to make silver, which is more valuable. One boasted that he had discovered how to make gold. One boasted that he had discovered how to make weapons. One boasted that he had invented ways of making metals from ingredients out of which metals are not usually made. One boasted about other sciences, since with these sciences such things as saltpeter, saltpeter, as saltpeter and gunpowder were invented, pilver. Thus, each one boasted about his wisdom. Finally, one of them spoke up and said, I am wiser than all of you. I am wise like the day. The others did not understand what he meant when he said that he was wise like the day. He explained to them, if all your wisdom was put together, it would only amount to a single hour. It is true that each science is derived from a particular day, depending on what was created on that day. Nevertheless, all the sciences merely involve combining things in different ways, literally combinations, hakovos, in different ways. Therefore, each science is only derived from combinations of things created on that day. With true wisdom, one can gather all these sciences into a single hour. But I am wise like a full day. This was the boast of the last wise man. I spoke up and said to him, like which day? The text adds, that is, like which day are you wise? Speaking of me, this wise man replied, this man is even wiser than I am, since he can ask, like which day? However, I am wise like any day you prefer. Now, you might ask why a person who can ask, like which day is wiser than one who is as wise as any day he desires. This, however, involves a story. It concerns the true man of kindness, who is actually a very great man. I go around and gather all true kindness. And bring it to the true man of kindness. Time itself is something that was created, and time exists primarily as a result of true kindness. I therefore go around gathering all true kindness and bring it to the true man of kindness. There is a mountain. On the mountain there is a stone. From this stone flows a spring. Everything has a heart. Therefore, the world as a whole also has a heart. The heart of the world has a complete body, with face, hands, and feet. However, a toenail of the heart of the world has more of the essential nature of a heart than the heart of anything else. Is more hardy, meluvov, hartziger. The mountain with the stone and the spring stands at one end of the world. The heart of the world stands at the opposite end of the world. The heart of the world faces the spring and constantly longs and yearns to come to the spring. It has a very, very great longing, and it cries out very much that it should be able to come to the spring. The spring also yearns for the heart. The heart has two things that make it weak. First, the sun pursues it and burns it. First, the sun pursues it and burns it. This is because it has such a desire, yearning to go and be close to the spring. The second thing that weakens the heart is the great longing and yearning that it constantly has toward the spring. It longs and yearns so much that its soul goes out and it cries out. It constantly stands facing the spring and cries out, "Help! No, Gewalt!" Desiring it so very much. When the heart wants to rest a bit and catch its breath, a great bird comes and spreads its wings over it, protecting it from the sun. It then can relax a bit. However, even when it is resting, it looks toward the spring and yearns for it. One may wonder, since it yearns for it so much, why does it not go to the spring? However, if it were to come close to the mountain, then it would no longer see the peak, the spitz, the shipua. It has a connotation of inclination. It then could not gaze at the spring, and if it stopped looking at the spring, it would die, since its main source of life is the spring. When it stands facing the mountain, it can see the peak upon which the spring is. But as soon as it comes close to the mountain, the peak is hidden from its eyes. This is clearly demonstrable. If it could not see the spring, then it would die. Expressed idiomatically, its soul would leave it. If the heart died, then the entire world would cease to exist. The heart is the life force of all things, and nothing can exist without a heart. It is for this reason that it cannot go to the spring. It therefore stands facing it, yearning and crying out. Time does not exist for the spring. The spring is not inside of time at all. The Yiddish adds, that is, the spring does not have any time whatsoever. That is, it has no day and no time in the world. This is because it is very much higher than the time of the world. The spring is not inside of time at all. The spring only has time because the heart gives it as a gift for one day. However, when the time comes for the day to come to a close, then at the end of the day the spring will not have any more time, and it will therefore die. This in turn would cause the heart to die. This in turn would cause the heart to die. The entire world would then cease to exist. Toward the end of the day, they begin to take leave of each other. Gesegen. At that time, they began to speak to one another in wonderful parables and lyrics, Lieder, with great love and tremendous desire. The true man of kindness watches very carefully over this. At the exact end of the day, the true man of kindness gives the heart a gift of one day. The heart gives the day to the spring, and the spring then once again has time. When this day comes from the place from which it comes, it also comes with very wonderful parables and lyrics, containing all types of wisdom. There is a difference between the various days. there is Sunday, Monday, etc. Besides this, there are new moon days. Besides this, there are new moon days and festivals. All the time that the true man of kindness has comes from my hand. It is I who go forth and gather all the true kindness, from which time comes into existence. It is for this reason that he is wiser even than the wise man, who is as wise as any day one prefers. This is because time and days come into existence primarily through the beggar with his speech deficit, who gathers true kindness which is the basis of time, and brings this kindness to the true man of kindness. The latter gives a day to the heart, who in turn gives it to the spring, and as a result the entire world is sustained. Therefore, time is brought into existence with parables and lyrics that contain all wisdom, through the beggar with the speech defect. Therefore, I have the word of the true man of kindness, that I can recite parables and lyrics that contain all wisdom. All time, along with parables and lyrics, comes into existence through my hand. And now, I am giving you this as a wedding present. You should be just like me. After he gave them this blessing, there was great joy and rejoicing. The fourth day. They completed the celebration of that day and went to sleep. The next morning, the couple began to yearn for the beggar with the crooked neck. All at once he appeared and said, "Here I am. Originally I blessed you that you should be like me. Now I am giving you this as a wedding present. You think I have a crooked neck? Actually, my neck is not crooked at all. Quite the contrary. I have a very straight neck. I have a very beautiful neck. However, there are vapors, hevel, in the world. I do not want to exhale and add to the vain vapors of the world. It is for this reason that my neck appears to be crooked. I made my neck crooked to avoid exhaling into the vapors of the world. But actually, I have a very beautiful, wonderful neck, since I have a wonderful voice. There are many sounds in the world that do not involve speech. I have such a wonderful neck and voice that I can mimic any of these sounds. Regarding this, I have the word, the askama, the agreement, of the land of music. There is a land where everyone is expert in the science of music. Everyone there studies this discipline, even little children. There is no child there who cannot play some kind of musical instrument. The least person in this land would be the greatest musician any place else. The wise men there, as well as the king and the musicians, are extraordinarily skilled in this art. Once, the leading sages of that land sat down, and each one boasted about his music. Musika, in Yiddish. One boasted about his skill on one instrument, while another boasted about his skill on another instrument. One boasted how well he played one instrument, and another boasted that he could play several instruments. Still, another one boasted that he was able to play all musical instruments. Another one then boasted that he could mimic a certain musical instrument with his voice. Still another boasted that he could mimic a different instrument. Yet another boasted that he knew how to mimic many instruments. Another boasted that he could mimic the beating of a drum so well that it sounded exactly like a drum. Poik. Another boasted that with his voice he could mimic the sound of artillery, knei sreifo, burning cane, and matis, in Yiddish. I was also there. I spoke up and said to them, "My voice is better than your voices. This is proof. If you are so skilled in music, let us see if you can help the two lands." There are two lands which are 1,000 miles apart. At night, people in these two lands cannot sleep. As soon as night falls, everyone, men, women, and children, begins to wail. If a stone were placed there, it would melt, out of pity for this wailing. They hear a great sound of sobbing, yelolo. And because of this, all the men, women, and children wail. This is true in both lands. The same sound of sobbing is heard in both lands, even though these two lands are 1,000 miles apart. If you are so skilled in music, I would like to see if you can help these two lands, or if you can mimic their sound. Let's see if you reproduce the exact sound of the wailing that is heard there. The wise men said to me, in the story it says to him, "Will you bring us there?" "Yes, I will," I replied. He, in the text, he replied. They all set out, and eventually came to one of the two lands. At night, when everyone began to wail, the wise men also began to wail. It was quite obvious that they could do nothing to help these people. In any case, I said to the wise men, "Tell me what is the source of the sobbing that is heard here." "And you do know?" they replied. "I most certainly do," I said. "There are two birds, one male and one female. They are the only such pair of birds in the world. The female was lost, and the male went to look for her. He searched for her, and she searched for him. They searched for one another for a very long time, until they got completely lost. When they realized that they could not find one another, they decided to remain where they were and build themselves nests. The male bird made himself a nest near one of the two lands. He was not right next to the land, but he was close enough that the people of the land could hear his voice from the place where he built his nest. The female bird built her nest near the other land. She too was close enough that they could hear her voice. At night, both of these birds begin to wail in a very loud voice. Each one wails for its mate. It is this sound of wailing that is heard in these two lands. When the people hear this wailing, they too all begin to wail, therefore they cannot sleep. The wise men did not want to believe me. "Will you bring us there?" they asked. "Yes," I replied. "I can bring you there. But you will not be able to come there. If you come close, you will not be able to tolerate the sound of the wailing. Even here you cannot stand it, and you are forced to wail along with the others. If you were there, you would not be able to stand it at all. It is also impossible to come there by day, since it is impossible to tolerate the joy that is there. By day, birds gather around each one of the pair, and they console each one and make it extremely joyful. The birds speak words of consolation, telling the pair that there is still a possibility that they will find one another. Therefore, during the day it is impossible to tolerate the great joy that exists there. The sound of the birds who make them rejoice cannot be heard from a great distance, only when one is actually there. However, the sound of the pairs wailing at night can be heard at a very great distance. Because of all this, it is impossible to approach their place. "Can you rectify this?" they asked me. I replied, "I can rectify this, since I can mimic any sound in the world. With my voice, I can reproduce any sound exactly. Besides this, I can also throw my voice, so that no sound is heard here, but the sound is heard at a distance. I can therefore throw the voice of the female bird and make it reach the place of the male bird, and also throw the voice of the male bird and make it reach the place of the female bird. By doing this, I will be able to bring them together. Through this, everything will be rectified." When he saw literally, "But who will believe this?" When he saw that they did not believe him, "But who will believe this?" he took them into a forest. They heard the sound of a door being opened, and then closed and locked with a bolt. They actually heard the click of the bolt, the klanke. Then they heard a gun, bix, being shot, and a dog being sent to retrieve the quarry. The dog thrashed, mischabet, around and dragged himself in the snow. gegroznet in Schnee. Gegroznet in Schnee. The wise men heard all this, but they did not see a thing. They also did not hear any sound whatsoever coming from me. Still, I, literally the one with the crooked neck, was the one who was projecting these sounds, and this is why they heard them. They realized that I could accurately produce any sound and also throw my voice. Therefore, I could rectify everything. Rabbi Nachman did not tell any more about this, and it is understood that he skipped part of the story here. Therefore, I have the word of that land that I have a wonderful voice, and that I can mimic any sound in the world. Now, as a wedding present, I am giving it to you, so that you will be like me. When he completed his story, there was very great joy and rejoicing there. Nanach nachmo, nachmo mumon. Nanach nachmo, nachmo mumon. The fifth day. On the fifth day, while they were rejoicing, the couple recalled the hunchback beggar. They yearned for him very much, saying, "How can we bring the hunchback beggar here? If he were here, there would be very great joy." Suddenly he appeared and said, "Here I am. I have come to the wedding." With that he fell on them, hugging and kissing them. He then said to them, "Originally, I blessed you that you should be like I am. Now I am giving you this as a wedding present, that you should be like me. I am not a hunchback at all. Quite the contrary. I have broad shoulders, places, breite places. The expression breite places. I have broad places, shoulders. My shoulders are a case of little holding much. Miet machzik es amaribu. I have an affidavit regarding this. Haskama. I have an affidavit regarding this. Once there was a discussion where people were boasting about this concept. Each one boasted that he was a case of little holding much. Everyone laughed at one of them and made a joke of him, but the others who boasted about being little holding much were accepted. However, in my case, the concept of little holding much is greater than that of all of them. One of these people boasted that his brain was an example of little holding much. In his brain, he carried thousands and myriads of people with all their needs, all their habits, all their discussions, havayos, common existences, and all their movements. And all their movements. Since his brain carried so many people, it was an example of little holding much. The others laughed at him. They said that the people are nothing, and therefore he is also nothing. One spoke up and said, "I saw such a case of little holding much. I once saw a mountain which was covered with excrement and filth. I found it very surprising, and I wondered where all this excrement and filth came from. There was a man near the mountain, and he said, 'All this came from me.' That man lived near the mountain, and whenever he ate and drank, he would throw his garbage and excrement there. He therefore made it a filthy place, putting a large amount of garbage and excrement on the mountain. Therefore, this man was an example of little holding much, since he was able to produce so much excrement. This is the same concept as that of the man who boasted that his brain held many people. One boasted that he was an example of little holding much. He had an estate that produced much fruit. When the amount of fruit produced by the land was calculated, it came out that the land did not have enough room to hold all the fruit. There was not enough space in the land to hold all the fruit that it produced. Therefore, it was an example of little holding much. His words were well accepted. This was considered an excellent example. This was considered an excellent example of little holding much. One said that he had a very wonderful orchard containing fruit. It was such a beautiful orchard that many people and nobles traveled there. In the summer, many people and nobles would come there to take walks. The orchard, however, did not have room for all the people who came there. So it was an example of little holding much. His words were also well accepted. One said that his speech was an example of little holding much. He was the secretary, for a great king, and many people came to him. He was the secretary for a great king, and many people came to him. Some came with his praise for the king, while others came with petitions. It is obviously impossible for the king to hear them all, he said, so I take all their messages and condense them into a few words that I tell the king. The few short words of mine contain all their praises and petitions. Therefore my speech is little holding much. One said that his silence was an example of little holding much. Many people were denouncing him and slandering him very much, but no matter how much they did so, he would answer them all with silence. Throughout it all, he remained completely silent. His silence was an answer for everything. Therefore, his silence was little holding much. One said that he was an example of little holding much. He explained, there is a man who is poor and blind, and also very huge. I, on the other hand, am very small. But even though I am very small, I lead the poor blind man, who is very huge. Therefore, I am little holding much. The blind man could trip and fall, but by leading him, I am actually holding him up. Machzik. Therefore, I am a little holding much. I am little, but I uphold this huge man. I was also there, and I said, actually, you are all examples of little holding much. I understand the true meaning of everything that you said. I know what you truly mean when you boast of being examples of little holding much. The last of you who boasted that he leads a blind man is the greatest of you all, but I am much higher than any of you. When the last one boasted that he led a giant, he meant that he directed the orbit of the moon, literally leads the sphere of the moon. The moon is considered to be a blind man, since it does not have any of its own light, and has nothing of its own. Leis l'magal meklim. Although this boaster is small, he directs the moon, which is very large. Moreover, he sustains the entire world, since the world needs the moon. Therefore, he is actually a true example of little holding much. Nevertheless, my concept of little holding much is much greater than all, including his. This is the proof. Once there was a group of people who studied the fact that every animal has a shadow in which it likes to rest. Conversely, there is a shadow for each and every animal. Every animal chooses its particular shadow where it wants to dwell. Every bird also has its own unique branch. It is on this particular branch that it desires to live. Studying this phenomenon, they sought to find a tree in whose shadow all animals live. All animals would desire to live in its shadow. Similarly, all birds, literally birds of heaven, sipurei shemaya, similarly, all birds would live in its branches. They probed and discovered that such a tree exists. They wanted to go to the tree, since near it there is wonderful delight that is beyond all imagination. All birds and animals are there, and none harms the other. They all live in harmony and frolic together. So it must be an extraordinary delight to be near that tree. They then probed to discover which direction they must travel to reach the tree. A dispute arose regarding this, and none of them could come to a conclusion. Some said that they should head east, while others said that it was to the west. One determined that the tree must be in one place, while another said that it was elsewhere. Thus they could not decide which way to go to come to the tree. Then a wise man came and said to them, "Why are you trying to discover in which direction the tree lies? Instead, try to find out who will be able to approach the tree. Not everyone can come near it. In order to do so, one must have all the attributes, midos, of the tree. The tree has 3 roots. The first root is faith, emunah. The second, reverence, yira. And the third, humility, anivus. The trunk of the tree is truth, and it is from there that its branches come forth. It is impossible to go to the tree unless one has these attributes." This group had a great sense of unity and did not want some to go to the tree and some to remain behind. They realized that not all would be able to go to the tree since some had the needed attributes, but others did not. Therefore all of them remained so as to give the rest an opportunity to strive and gain the attributes necessary to allow them to come to the tree. They followed this plan, and they struggled and worked until all of them had these attributes. When all of them had the necessary attributes, they all had the same idea, and all of them agreed on one way as being the true path to the tree. They set out, and after a while they were able to see the tree at a distance. However, when they looked at the tree, it was not standing in space. The tree did not exist in space, and since it did not have a place, it was impossible to approach it. It was impossible to approach it. Literally, how was it possible to come to it? I was also with them, and I said, "I can bring you to the tree. This tree does not have any place at all, since it is above the concept of space. It is also above the concept of little holding much, since this concept is also an aspect of space. It is obvious that the concept of little holding much always involves the concept of space, no matter how little space is involved. However, the concept of little holding much that I have is at the very end of space, beyond which there is no space at all. Therefore, I can carry you to the tree which is totally above space." The hunchback was on the level of the intermediate concept between space and that which is above space. He possessed the highest possible concept of little holding much at the end of space, above which the word place does not apply at all. Anything higher than this is totally above the concept of space. Therefore, he could carry them from within space to a concept that is above space. Understand this well. I took them and carried them to the tree. Therefore, I have the word of these men that I possess the highest concept of little holding much. He appeared to be a hunchback because he carried much on his shoulders, being a case of little holding much. I am now giving you this as a gift, that you should be like me. When he finished, there was great joy and very great rejoicing. The 6th day. On the 6th day, they were also rejoicing, and they yearned very much, saying, "How could the one without hands be brought here?" Suddenly he appeared and said, "Here I am. I have come to your wedding." He spoke to them in the same manner as the other beggars and kissed them. Then he said, "You think there is something wrong with my hands? Actually, there is nothing wrong with my hands. I have great power in my hands. But I do not use the power in my hands in this physical world, since I need this power for something else entirely. Regarding this, I have the word of the water castle. Wasserik in Schloss." Once, a number of men were sitting together, and each one boasted about the power in his hands. One boasted that he had a certain power in his hands, and another boasted that he had a different power. Finally, one boasted that the power in his hands was such that if an arrow were shot, he could retrieve it. That if an arrow were shot, he could retrieve it. He had such great power in his hands that even after an arrow had been shot, he could return it and bring it back to him. I challenged him, what kind of arrow can you retrieve? There are 10 types of arrows. This is because there are 10 types of poisons. When a person shoots an arrow, he first coats it with some type of poison. There are 10 types of poison. When one coats the arrow with the first type of poison, it does a certain degree of harm. If the arrow is coated with the second type of poison, it does worse harm. Thus there are 10 types of poison, each one more harmful than the other. That is why there are 10 types of arrows. All the arrows are actually the same. But since there are different poisons with which the arrows are rubbed, and there are 10 types of poison, it is considered as if there are 10 types of arrows. I therefore asked him, what kind of arrow can you bring back? I also asked him if he could retrieve the arrow only before it hit its victim, or if he could bring it back even after it hit. To the second question he replied, I can retrieve an arrow even after it hits its target. However, to the first question he said that he could only retrieve one type of arrow. I said to him, if this is true, then you cannot heal the queen's daughter. If you can only turn back one type of arrow, you cannot heal her. One of the men present boasted that he had such power in his hands that whenever he took or received something from another, he was actually giving to him. For him, the very act of receiving was an act of giving. Therefore, he was a master of charity. I asked him what type of charity he gave, since there are 10 types of charity. He replied that he gave a tithe, masios. I said to him, if this is so, you cannot heal the queen's daughter. You cannot even approach the place where she is. You can only go through one wall in the place where she is staying. You cannot get to where she is. One of the men present boasted about the power in his hands, saying that there were officials in the world. These are highly placed people who are in charge of cities and nations. Each one needs wisdom. Through his hands, he could give them wisdom. He did this by laying hands on them. I asked him, what type of wisdom can you confer with your hands? There are 10 types of wisdom. When he replied, what kind of wisdom, I said to him, if this is the case, you cannot heal the queen's daughter. You cannot understand her pulse, since there are 10 types of pulse. You can only confer one type of wisdom, and therefore only understand one type of pulse. One of the men present boasted that he had such great power in his hands that when there was a storm he could hold it back with his hands. Then with his hands he could make the wind blow with the proper force, mishkal, so that the wind was beneficial. I asked him, what kind of wind can you hold with your hands? There are 10 types of wind. There are 10 kinds of winds. He described the type of wind that he could hold, and I said, if this is the case, you cannot heal the queen's daughter. You can only play one type of melody. She can only be healed through melody. And there are 10 types of melody. But you can only play one type of melody out of these 10. All the people there spoke up and asked me, what is your ability? I replied, I can do what you cannot do. In each of the cases that you discussed, there are 9 portions that you cannot accomplish. I can accomplish them all. This is the story. Once there was a king who desired a queen's daughter. He made all kinds of plots to capture her until he was finally successful and took her captive. Then the king had a dream. The queen's daughter was standing over him and she killed him. When he woke up, he took this dream to heart. He summoned all the dream interpreters, and they all said that it would come true in its literal meaning that she would kill him. The king could not decide what to do with her. If he killed her, it would grieve him. If he sent her away, this would anger him, since another man would then have her. This would frustrate him very much, since he had worked so hard to get her, only to have her belong to another man. Furthermore, if he exiled her and she ended up with another man, there would be all the more chance of the dream coming true. With an ally, it would be even easier for her to kill him. Still, he was afraid because of the dream, and did not want to keep her near him. Therefore the king did not know what to do with her. As a result of the dream, his love for her gradually began to wane. As time passed, his desire for her grew less and less. The same was true of her. Her love for him declined more and more until she hated him. Eventually she fled. The king sent his men to search for her. When they returned, they reported that she was near the water castle. This was a castle made of water. It had 10 walls, one inside the other. All made of water. The floors inside this castle were also made of water. This castle also had trees and fruit, all made of water. It goes without saying how beautiful this castle was and how unusual. A castle of water is certainly something wonderful and unusual. It is impossible for anyone to enter the water castle. It is made entirely of water, and anyone entering it would drown. Meanwhile, the queen's daughter who had fled to the castle was going around the water castle. The king was informed that she was circling the castle. The king took his army and set out to capture her. When the queen's daughter saw them coming, she decided that she would flee into the castle. She would rather drown than be captured by the king and have to remain with him. There was also the possibility that she would survive and be able actually to get into the water castle. When the king saw her fleeing into the water, he said, "If this is how it is," and he gave orders to shoot her, saying, "If she dies, she dies." The soldiers shot her and hit her with all 10 types of arrows, rubbed with the 10 types of poison. She ran into the castle and entered into it. She went through the gates and the walls of water. She went through the gates and the walls of water. The walls of water have such gates. The walls of water have such gates. She passed through all 10 walls of the water castle until she came to its interior. When she got there, she fell unconscious. I heal her. I heal her. In ich and I heal her. Someone who does not possess all 10 types of charity, literally have in his hands all 10 types of charity, cannot enter all 10 walls. He will drown in the water there. The king and his army tried to pursue her, but they all drowned in the water. I, on the other hand, was able to go through all 10 walls of water. These walls of water are like the waves of the sea, which stand like a wall. The winds support the waves and lift them up. These waves constitute the 10 walls which stand there permanently, but they are lifted up and supported by the winds. I, however, was able to enter through all 10 walls. I was also able to draw all 10 types of arrows out of the queen's daughter. I also knew all 10 types of pulses and could detect them with my 10 fingers. Each one of the 10 fingers has the power to detect one of the 10 types of pulse. I could then heal her through the 10 types of melody. I thus heal her. I thus heal her. Therefore, I have this great power in my hands. I am now giving you this as a gift. When he finished his speech, there was great joy and tremendous rejoicing. Rבינו concluded, "It is very difficult for me to tell this story, however. Since I have begun it, I am forced to end it. There is not a single redundant word in this story. One who is versed in the sacred literature will be able to understand some of the allusions. The story speaks of arrows and a certain power in the hands to turn back arrows. This is related to God's statement, 'My hand will grasp judgment.' Rashi explains this verse saying, when a human being shoots an arrow, he cannot turn it back, but when God shoots an arrow, he can. The concept of charity is seen as being related to the walls of water, which are the waves of the sea. This is alluded to in the verse, your charity is like the waves of the sea. The story speaks of the power of grasping the winds in one's hand. This is alluded to in the verse, who gathers up the wind in his palm. This is related to the concept of melody, as mentioned elsewhere. The 10 types of melody and 10 types of pulses have been discussed earlier. Rבינו adds, all this I heard explicitly. However, regarding the meaning of who, what, and when, the story is very deep. This involves the primary concept of the story itself. Who were the beggars? What were they? When were they? All this is too deep to be understood. Rבינו continues, the end of the story would involve the 7th day and the beggar without feet. However, we were not worthy of hearing it. The same is true of the end of the first part of the story regarding the king who gave over his kingdom to his son during his lifetime. Nachman said that he would not tell any more. This is a great loss. We will not be worthy of hearing it until the Messiah Mashiach comes. May this happen quickly in our days. Amen. Nachman also said, if I knew nothing else other than this story, it would still be very extraordinary. He said explicitly that this story is wonderful and unusual. It contains many moral lessons and Torah lessons, and has in it many Torah concepts and many teachings. It also speaks of many ancient saints. Thus, King David stood at one end of the earth and screamed out to the spring which issues forth from the stone on the mountain. It is thus written, from the ends of the earth I call to you. When my heart is faint, lead me to a rock that is too high for me. All this I heard from Rabbi Nachman's own mouth explicitly. From his words it is obvious that King David is the heart mentioned in the story, where the heart of the world stands at one end of the world facing the spring and screams out in constant desire. Still the ideas are obscure. Happy is he who is worthy of grasping the mystery of these stories. The following appears after the story in Hebrew. The concept of King David in the above mentioned verse, from the ends of the earth, which alludes to the story, this pertains to the 3rd day. For there they spoke about the heart and the spring. See there, and you will see wonders how in each concept wondrous things are alluded to. Of the great awesome things of this story it is impossible to speak at all, for this is above all. Happy is he who is worthy, even in the world to come, of understanding a little of it. If a person has any brain, his hair will stand on end when he looks well at this awesome story, and he will understand a little of the greatness of the Creator and the greatness of the true tzaddikim, for nothing like it has ever been heard. I heard the concept of the verse, from the ends of the earth, mentioned above, which pertains to the story of the 3rd day, explicitly from the Rebbe's holy, awesome lips. May he rest in peace. I also found that most of the words of the Psalm 61 in which this verse is written allude to lofty mysteries of the story of the 3rd day. Days on the days of the king shall be increased, because he constantly needs that days should be added on his days, as mentioned above. Kindness and truth will preserve him. This is the true man of kindness, the groise man, the emese ish chesed. For all time and days are made through the great man, who is a true man of kindness, as noted in the story. He continues and increases the days of the king. This is the heart mentioned above, which is the concept of King David, and this is the meaning of he will preserve him. He watches and preserves it so that as soon as it comes very close to the end of the day, when the heart of the world would die, then this true man of kindness protects and watches it when he comes and gives a day to the heart. And this is the meaning of, thus I will sing to your name forever, to pay my vows of each day. For every day that he gives comes from the hymns and songs. I will take refuge in the cover of your wings, Selo. When the heart needs to rest, the great bird comes and spreads its wings over it. This is, I will take refuge in the cover of your wings. This pertains to the 1st day. The concept of the old men, each one boasted about what he remembered. One remembered even when they cut his navel, and he was the least of them. The Rebbe of blessed memory said that in the Talmud there's a similar concept where Shmuel boasted that he remembered the pain of circumcision. Nachma Miyuman. מאוד היקושי לי לרדס הלכו תמידי היוקר, הגיל החוק כננסים ואוי מה ותסכו, לכו מעטים הנפיירו ותניין בזמשיך וקימן, חזק וימאס פה ותסכו, ואנחנו נחמו מיומן, ובזה הגלו לחסוית והימוד וקודש, וקר וקר, וסם סרי קייד, וחזגבוי לתבני, סימן יזיים בתמס יומני שאין חמסן, נחמו מיומן.